Hey, Beau, how can I trust people more?
Well, this is such a wonderful question, and it's a really important one. As actually, all the questions that you send in, we select them because, and it's not just me selecting, it's the whole lab of misfits that's selecting your questions. So please do continue to send in your questions if you feel that my thoughts might be of value to you, and I hope they prove to be. So, trust. What an essential topic, right? Essential to our lives, essential to our well-being, essential to our loving relationships, essential to our health. And so because of this, I'm going to maybe do more than just recording on and answering to this question about how can I trust more. The first one I want to do is to suggest the idea that you actually trust a huge amount. We all do. We trust strangers every day. In fact, we trust other people who we've never met, we never will meet, with our lives 100 times every single day. And if not our lives, at least with our well-being, at least with our health, whether that be emotional or physical. I'll give you an example to just ground the point. So I used to live in New York, and this is a few years ago, before COVID, before I started my vagabonding. And I lived there for about 3 or 4 years. I love New York for many reasons. And in this particular instance, I remember the scene of this guy cycling down the street. I used to do a lot of cycling in New York. That's, for me, the only way to get around the city. And so I was watching this guy cycling. We were actually cycling not far from each other. And I noticed that this guy, he wasn't holding on to the handlebars. He had his headphones on. He was playing the music. You could clearly tell the music was playing super loudly, so he wouldn't be able to hear anything that's going around him. He was even closing his eyes. He was swerving as he danced to the music, which was wonderful, right? It was great to watch. And you got this sense of that he was in complete abandon and complete freedom. But then, and you also had the sense that he was felt he was being a bit rebellious as well, like he was going against the grain and being different. And of course he was. But what he didn't realize, I think, I imagine, is that his freedom was only possible because of everybody else around him. Everyone else around him was looking after him. The cars were avoiding him. The taxi drivers were avoiding him. The passengers weren't stopping out in front of him. Even when he went through a red light, the cars would stop. So his freedom was simply a consequence of everyone else. And he was unconsciously, I think, at least implicitly, putting trust, his life, in the hands of everybody else. And it was through the kindness, or at least the tolerance of everyone else, that gave him freedom. And in some sense, that is the source of freedom, of other people. Right? We empower other people to be free. In fact, I think this is one of the most fundamental aspects of any loving relationship, is not the ability to protect someone from risk, but the ability to empower them to take risk. So with this little example, I want to suggest that you're like that bike rider. Right? You put your life in other people's hands all the time. I do, right? Right now, I'm sitting in a fairly nondescript hotel on the 10th floor in Vancouver. As you can tell, how do I know that this building's not going to fall? Did I check the engineering drawings? Did I check the architectural drawings? How do I know it's not going to collapse? When you're driving down the road, you have trust that the other people on the road are not going to swerve into you if they're going the opposite direction, or they're not going to crash into behind you. Yeah, you put your trust in those other people. In the food that you eat. If you go to a restaurant, you have trust that the chef and the people looking after the food have looked after the food for you. They haven't left the meat sitting out for days and days and days, not in the refrigerator. That the pilot in the airplane is going to get you to your destination. Not just the pilot, but the person who designed the airplane, the person who put the airplane together, the person who maintains the engine, the guy who, or woman who fills the tanks, right? That your train driver, that he or she, you have complete trust that this person is going to get to. You don't even think about it. I often don't even think about it. The bus driver, that he or she is going to get you to your destination. The chair that you sat in, possibly if you're sitting watching this little video, did you check the chair before you sat down on it? Are you checking the floor with every step that you take to make sure it's not going to collapse? Right? Every moment of every day, we have faith in the world around us. We have assumptions and biases, and these assumptions and biases keep us alive. We often think that biases are somehow something to be avoided. Yes, that can sometimes be the case. Biases can actually constrain you. Your assumptions constrain you, but they also keep you alive. We have thousands of assumptions and biases, not just the few that psychologists will talk about, but we have thousands of assumptions and biases that you apply every single day that your brain does. What would happen, I wonder, if we lived our lives making the implicit explicit? If you made implicit the fact that every moment of every day of your life is actually in the hands of another person, that you've actually trusted another person. Might we be more grateful? Might we be less inclined to be shouting at that bus driver, knowing that you're putting your life in his or her hands? Might we live life with a little bit more humility? And wouldn't that possibly be tremendously powerful? Because creativity begins with humility, in my view. I mean, I think this is so important that I personally think we could not only make the implicit explicit, but I think we could actually practice it. Put ourselves in situations where we explicitly and decidedly put our lives in someone else's hands. And I did this just the other day, about a few days ago. Before I came up here to Vancouver, I was in San Francisco, and I went skydiving. And it's the 7th time I've done it, right? I think it's around 7. And whenever I go skydiving, I always go tandem. Now, I've skydived enough where actually I think it's over 7 times you could actually have your solo license. But my intention is to actually skydive tandem. Why? Because I am choosing purposefully to trust another person. I want to have that experience of putting my life in someone else's hands, someone who I've never met, right? Now, I have to completely let go of any control. I mean, how stupid it would be for me to try to control that situation. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to completely follow this person's directions. Where to put my hands, how to arch my back. Everything about my experience is going to be controlled by him, in this case, him. And I find that a remarkably cathartic experience. I also find it part of the exhilaration of skydiving, of not just falling and not just seeing and being immersed in that nature and feeling that vulnerability, but also the vulnerability of trusting another person who you've never met. So that's one mechanism by which I practice trusting. And I wonder what it might be for you. How might you make the implicit explicit of trust in your life? And how might you practice that? And isn't it ironic that we so often don't trust explicitly the people who are most important to us? The people, even in our loving relationships, in our friendships, they seem to be so fraught with a lack of trust, right? And I wonder why that is. And I have a few ideas about that, which maybe I'll share in the next episode. So that's my first thought on how do I trust people more? Well, the fact is you already are. We just didn't really necessarily know that explicitly, but it was implicit, almost implicit in everything we do. So maybe engage with that, make that implicit explicit, and consider what does that mean for the rest of your life and how you live your life in relation to other people. Thanks for listening.